What's going on, everyone? Today we are going to go over the best items for every single champion in set 8.5. I know some champions, they existed in the previous set. Some of their best items have changed, some of them have not, but we're going to go over every single one of them. So we're going to go from tier 1 all the way to tier 5. And there are some assumptions I want you guys to consider before moving into the video, and that is that we do have some like mandatory items. For example, on like Nasus, if you go for stacks on stacks, rapid fire cannon is just absolutely necessary, and you can see that by having it highlighted in this like orangey color over here. You should also know that you don't need to itemize every single champion. You only want to itemize them if they're going to be your carry, your main tank, or if they're like a support unit holding support items. And also, what the best build can be can change depending on your composition, what augments you have, and things of that nature. So I'll try to cover everything that each champion needs. For example, like Camille really likes lifesteal, so I like building double bloodthirster on her. But if you have like celestial blessing or maybe an admin that gives some healing, then maybe you only take one of them and then have a second damage item instead. So I'll try to keep those in mind whenever I go through this list. I have it kind of sorted as top left are the tanks, middle are kind of like the bruisers, right side is kind of like the melee carries, bottom right AP carries, and bottom left AD carries. Some champions are kind of in between everything, so do keep that in mind. But starting at the top left, for all the tier 1 champions, I'm going to assume you're going to have the carry augment for these, and that's what these item recommendations are going to go over. So with Poppy, that's bigger, better buckler. That gives her a lot of armor. So what you want to do is get a bramble vest so that she can one-tap a lot of backline carries. Dragon Claw is great to give her more effective HP because if you have a lot of armor, you're lacking a lot of magic resistance. So it kind of makes her unkillable, plus it heals her up over time. And then Redemption is just a great third item, especially on 3-star tanks. So moving on into Blitzcrank. Blitzcrank, he gets dynamic defenses. This gives the Gargoyle stone plate, so you're pretty much always going to have that on him. It's not his best item, but it's like a pretty good one, especially since you get it for free from the augment. After that, Warmogs is great to give him more effective HP. He has so much damage reduction that when you have a lot of damage reduction, health helps a lot more. And then Redemption, again, just a solid, great third item. Silas, just generic tank items. Warmogs, Dragonclaw, Bramble, not too much to say there. Pantheon, this is the new champion of the set in this category, and his carry augment is called the best offense. He gains 50 ability power and 100 magic resistance, so he is going to want to be played in a lot of ability power lobbies. So with that in mind, you want to build a Dragon Claw on him. His ability also scales off of his magic resistance, so he's pretty much the magic resist version of Poppy. After that, Protector's Vow is really good to get him to cast earlier. It's not like 100% required, but Protector's Vow is just like a pretty solid third tank item in general because it gives you a lot of resistances and it gives you a % max health shield. It kind of works the same way as Redemption, where it's like a really good third tank item. So that's why we like it there. Also, you have Heart, so it kind of gets him to get a free cast right away. And then last item is Ionic Spark. Ionic Spark is good because he's typically played in ability power compositions because he is a Heart unit, and having that magic resist shredding is really good for most teams that run a Pantheon. Next up, we have Renekton. His ability is Reign of Anger, where he just turns into this like auto-attacking max health bruiser. So Titan's Resolve to live really long, really good. Bloodthirster to sustain, and then Warmogs, same as last set. Nasus, RFC, Lifesteal is good on him because he's kind of close to the front, and then the Spear of Shojin helps him to cast a lot more. I'd say the replaceable item here is Spear of Shojin, but right now it's performing pretty well. Wukong can use all sorts of different builds. He could use full AP builds such as like Double Hat, Jeweled Gauntlet, or something like that. He could go really wild, but the build I find that's the most like safe to play is Titan's Resolve, Bloodthirster, and Jeweled Gauntlet. He does like a little bit of healing, so do try to get that on him unless you have some sort of secondary carry that can kind of help him clean up. Gangplank is the only melee AP carry. I guess Wukong kind of is as well, but they do it in different ways. Gangplank's more of like a nuker. Wukong's kind of like, he's like a tank trait, right? But for Gangplank, blue buff is really solid. It's not mandatory. A lot of people think blue buff is mandatory on Gangplank, but you see here, like, we don't have it highlighted, so you don't like absolutely need it. He pretty much just needs any 3 items. It could be like a AP item such as Hat or Jeweled Gauntlet. It could be a healing item such as Handed Justice, Hextech Gunblade, or Bloodthirster, and then Titan's Resolve just really good on most melee carries in general. But pretty much any damage items can do. You could do like Archangels, you could do Ionic Spark, you could even do like a QSS on him, Guard Breaker, Giant Slayer, things of that nature. Next up, let's go on into the AP carries. Lux, this one's pretty simple. You just need a mana item, either blue buff or Spear of Shojin. It honestly depends on how many Star Guardians you have for which one is better. And then after that, just any AP items. You don't need Jeweled Gauntlet on Lux whenever you have her carry augment because you pretty much have a built-in Jeweled Gauntlet on it because her second cast just does 120% more damage. So you don't need like the extra Jeweled Gauntlet to crit on that second part. You just need her to cast a bunch. Some people even do like double mana builds such as like blue buff and Spirit Shojin. But I feel like that's a little overkill sometimes. So you just want her to be able to kill the frontline tanks because especially since she targets whoever she's attacking right now, you don't want to get stuck on the front line. So you want her to kill the tanks in 2 casts. So that's why the Giant Slayer or like a Guard Breaker could be really good. Lulu, same build as before, blue buff, Hextech Gunblade, Giant Slayer. She likes the Gunblade a lot because she's often placed on the second row. So that's why you kind of need it there for her to survive a little bit longer. Giant Slayer is really good because she's mainly attacking tanks as well. Lucian, blue buff, Jeweled Gauntlet, Rabadon's Death Cap, pretty standard AP build there. There's really nothing that special about him. You just want the blue buff and then any AP or damage items like Giant Slayer, Hextech Gunblade, Guard Breaker, things of that nature. Ashe, her carry augment isn't that great, but let's say they change it and it gets buffed up a little bit, then I think it could be really good. In that case, you want just like the standard AD build, such as like Last Whisper, Runons, and Deathblade. Kale, kind of the same thing. Last Whisper, Giant Slayer, and IE. It's a pretty standard AD build for any backliner. Now, let's say you don't get the carry augments for any of these units. You typically don't want to use items on your 1-cost units. So let's say you're playing one of these 1-cost units in the late game and they're like 2-starred and you're like, oh, I have to put an item on them because I have items on everyone else. What do you want on them? Well, for your tanks, you probably want something like a ZZ Rat Portal because ZZ Rat Portal is like a fake tank item. It's great on tanks that aren't actually tanky. And then for backliners, you could use support items such as Chalice of Power, Zephyr, Shroud of Stillness, or something like a Static Shiv to reduce magic resistance. But let's move on into the tier 2 now. Tier 2 is kind of the same thing. You generally only want to itemize them if they are 3-starred or if you have the carry augments for them, unless denoted otherwise. For example, on Annie and Pike, you can put items on them if they're just like regular and not 3-starred. We could go through the 2 costs a little bit faster because there aren't that many of the new units. So Lee Sin, he's a heart, so similar to Pantheon, you want the Ionic Spark because he's played in a lot of AP comps, and then just generic tank items work. Sunfire is really good because he lives a long time, and then Bramble Vest pretty solid so he doesn't get bursted by critical strikes because he is a shielding champion. And typically single target burst damage beats those types of champions, especially if you have Cleansing Safeguard. Onto the next unit, we have Annie. Annie can be used in a bunch of AP compositions, so that's why you can itemize her without having her 3-starred or without her carry augment. So just Ionic Spark, Sunfire Cape, pretty standard for those builds. Vi with her Unrelenting Force augment, best in slot item is Titan's Resolve because it pretty much stacks on itself and gives her a lot of power. Bramble Vest good to not get bursted, and then Bloodthirster, she does a decent amount of damage, so she heals herself up pretty well, but you could use something like a Redemption or Dragon Claw for healing instead. I do recommend having 1 healing item on your buy though. Malphite, he's going to be played in a lot of AP comps, so Ionic Spark's pretty good. If you're playing him in an AD comp, such as like a Super Draven comp, you could do something like a Sunfire Cape instead of the Ionic, and then just like generic tank items, Warmogs, Gargoyle Stoneplate, gonna do great for him. Next up, we have Rel. Rel is really good when she has a lot of resistances, so that's why you like the double Titan's Resolve because it works well with her ability. So you kind of isolate her in the front so you get the maximum value from it. And then after that, just Sunfire Cape, so it applies to a lot of people because people should wrap around her. Fiora is the next one up. Her best item by far is Quicksilver whenever you have her as your carry augment because you really just need her to get her attacks off to proc the effect. After that, she's going to be one of those drain tanks, so Titan's Resolve is really good, and then since she heals off her max HP, a Warmogs is pretty decent there, but this third item can be almost anything. Camille reroll is pretty interesting because she really just one-taps everything. She does a lot of damage, and you generally have an attack damage admin effect whenever you play it, so that's why you don't really build raw AD on her. Obviously, there's still AD from like the swords like Bloodthirster, IE, and second Bloodthirster all build out from sword, but you're never building like a Deathblade on her because she should have enough AD from stuff like admin effects. If not, you probably just shouldn't be playing the comp. So what ends up happening is with the Bloodthirster, she ends up taking a bunch of damage, and then after she casts, she heals all the way up to full, and then rinse repeat until she kills everyone, so that's why you kind of want this build. Yasuo's up next. He's a little weird because he likes attacking and casting, so that's why Hand of Justice is the item of choice for him because he benefits from both AD and AP. Titan's Resolve, same reason, and then Quicksilver is really great because whenever you're in the front, you don't want to get CC'd on a lot of your melee carries. Pike is weird. So his carry augment gives you a bunch of econ. So you just want him to cast a lot. So you want him to live long, so Redemption's pretty solid on him to just kind of regen a bit. And then Spear of Shojin is good for helping him cast a bit longer. If you don't have the carry augment though, just like a Spear of Shojin is fine if you have nothing else to put it on. Or you could just choose not to itemize him at all. Ezreal's up next, Rising Spell Force. You really need the blue buff. It's the most important item by far because he benefits based on how often he casts. And then after that, just any AP items, Jeweled Gauntlet, Hextech Gunblade, pretty good. But you could also do Hat, Jeweled Gauntlet. You don't need the healing effect on your Ezreal. Other items such as like Giant Slayer, Guard Breaker also work. Next up, we have Jinx. Jinx is really good with Get Excited, but she's also pretty solid as an item holder for Misfortune in general, so you could just build Misfortune items on your Jinx, but if you want to use her as your carry, Spirit Shojin going to be really good, Static Shiv next because she attacks so quickly, and then stuff like Jeweled Gauntlet or Hat to cap it off is pretty solid. Next up, we have Draven. Draven's build is going to be always Last Whisper because whenever you're running Mecha Draven, you just need the Last Whisper because he's your only source of damage. So if you ever face someone with a lot of defenders, you just auto lose. So to prevent that from happening, you need to build the Last Whisper. After that, IE is really good to make his ability crit. And then since he's a backline carry, I prefer Hextech Gunblade over Bloodthirster. You could argue that the Bloodthirster shield is really good on Mecha Prime units because it gives a shield based on their health. However, since he's in the back, other units are going to be tanking for him, so I find that you get a little bit more value from the shared Omnivamp that heals up your other tanks as the fight is going on. Obviously, both choices are fine. You could also just do a triple damage Draven build. Sivir, like her carry augment, if we just read it, you just gain gold. So like, yeah, you could just stack a lot of attack damage on her, but you never really use Sivir as your primary carry. At least right now you don't, and they're just much better sure shots to kind of use. So I really just don't recommend itemizing Sivir. Maybe I should have put like a Zeke's Herald on her to represent, to put like support items on her or something like that. But until they change something, I don't really recommend using Sivir. Again, similar to the one-cost units, in the late game, if you have some of these units on your team, they could use all the utility or support items as well. So you could put like a ZZ Rot on your Vi if she's like a 2-star unit. Let's move on to 3-cost. 3-cost gets a little trickier because sometimes you want them 3-starred as your primary carry. Sometimes they're just there as trait bots. So it's a little bit trickier here, but I'll try to do my best to summarize anyway. So in the tanks, Rammus, typical Rammus build is just Warmogs, Bramble Vest, and Dragonclaw, just like the generic tank items. Alistair, you don't really want to itemize because all his comps, he has better tanks available because he's an Aegis, so you always have Echo available. Echo should be holding your main tank items. So you could just put the utility items on your Alistair instead. Nyla's really good in a lot of AP comps. Nyla can be used either in a duelist comp where she goes triple locket, but that's a unique build, so I'm going to be focusing more on like the generic Nyla if she's going to be your main tank. And whenever you play Nyla, you generally want to group your units up in the front, so if she's really good in like battle mage comps that like staying in the second row. So that's why you really want items such as like Redemption on her so that you get a lot more value from that item. After that, since she's a Star Guardian, she does work pretty well in a lot of ability power comps, so that's why you like the Ionic Spark, and then Sunfire is just good in general for long fights. But you could also do something like a Titan's Resolve that was pretty popular in the last set. Shen is one of the new kids on the block. He is an Infinite Team defender and hacker, but again, since defenders have a 4-cost tank, it's similar to the Alistair situation where like there's just a better tank available in the Garen. I'm not saying never itemize Shen, and like maybe 3-star Shen does pretty well also, but maybe just invest 1 or 2 tank items on him, not necessarily 3 unless you have him 3-starred. Riven is a bit weird because you do want her 3-starred, and she's mainly played in the Anima squad comp. So when that happens, like sometimes you can go for a Riven 3, Vayne 3, but other games it doesn't happen. So you could put 3 items on your Riven whenever you go for those builds. It's going to work out most of the time, but obviously it spikes a lot harder if you have the 3-star Riven. So if you know you're going to get 3-star Riven, definitely like prioritize triple items on her. But if you're like playing the game and you're not hitting that many Rivens, maybe just put 1 or 2 tank items on her and then save the rest for someone else, such as like a random legendary later on. But her items, because you run Misfortune, Ionic Spark is necessary. Redemption's good because you have a lot of melee units in the Anima squad comp, so she could heal up other people, and then Sunfire Cape, just solid tank item in general. If you haven't noticed yet, there is a pattern between some tanks being utility tanks and other tanks being like pure tanks. For example, in the 3-cost, Rammus is like a pure tank, whereas Nyla is like a utility tank, where the items kind of help out the rest of the team. Next up is Jax. Jax is going to be one of those melee brawler units, and his required item is RFC, so he isn't melee anymore. After that, Rageblade and QSS are by far the two best options, just because you really can't have him get interrupted whenever he's your main carry, and then Guinsoo's is obviously really good for stacking up. If you have the RFC, you don't need healing that much. Obviously, when you're playing the game, you don't get to handpick your items. So if you get dropped like a Hextech Gunblade or a Bloodthirster, like, yeah, just build it on your Jax. But if you're talking about like super best items on Jax, I think these three are going to be the best because you technically don't need the healing. You could just kill everything before he takes damage and dies. Gnar's a little different though, because he is going to be in the front and he's going to be pretty much just whacking everyone in the head. And yeah, to do that, you need to survive. So Bloodthirster is necessary on him because he's going to be taking damage. And then after that, Titan's Resolve is really good because again, since he's taking damage, he's going to get the stacks off. And then they're also just going to help him blow everyone up. Titans is probably his best item, but you could probably use other like pseudo bruiser items or just go damage on him. Now onto the AP carries. Sona is a great item holder, so you just use whatever items are great for your 4-cost carry on her. But if you must itemize her, just put a blue buff on her and you could pretty much call it a day after that. For LeBlanc carry, blue buff and Spirit Shojin are kind of the same thing. That's why I don't really highlight the blue buff. But having one mana item on her is nice, especially if you do not have a mana admin. After that, just go for generic AP items such as like Jeweled Gauntlet, Hat, or Archangels, or Giant Slayer, Guardbreaker, things of that nature. For Vex, Vex is a new kid on the block. Blue buff, completely necessary because she has 40 mana. Whenever you have like low mana count, blue buff is going to be really good because it reduces the ability's cost to cast by 10. So you just get more like percentage change whenever you build a blue buff on a low mana champion. After that, just generic AP, Jeweled Gauntlet, Hat is really good. Hat is especially good on Vex because she does not gain AP from her traits. So when you look at a spell slinger like LeBlanc, the Archangels, like, it's not really required, you know? You could use something like a Giant Slayer or Guardbreaker, like pretty much the same way as she could use like any AP item. But for Vex, like, yeah, sometimes you're forced to build a Giant Slayer on her, but you really do prefer having the Hat because the way the math works out, it just adds to her damage much better because she doesn't get any ability power from her traits. Next up, we have Morgana. She's pretty much a support unit. Chalice of Power is really good on her because it gives 30 starting mana, which is a lot for an item. So it helps her cast early, and that just CCs people earlier. Obviously, CC happening earlier in a fight is going to be better than it happening later. And then after that, you just really care about her casting, so Spirit Shojin's pretty solid. There are some damage Morgana builds, but honestly, like, they're just better units to itemize for damage. It's kind of like Vel'Koz from last set. Like, yeah, you could build damage Vel'Koz, but they're just better units that deal damage. Like, if you compare like LeBlanc and Vex's damage to Morgana's damage, it's like not even close. Kai'Sa's pretty much the same build from last set. Shiv, attack speed, Rageblade, and then Giant Slayer. Shiv is like really the only important item, I'd say, though. And then after that, you could kind of like do supportive stuff, such as like Quicksilver or like Damage Amp, Giant Slayers, Jeweled Gauntlets, Guardbreakers, things of that nature. Next up, we have Vayne. Her build is going to differ a lot depending on what synergies you're playing. So if you're playing Duelist, her build's going to change compared to Anima Squad. Right now, I believe I have her as optimized for the Spread Shot Vayne build with Anima Squad. So generally, whenever you have Spread Shot, you just want to maximize her attack damage. And you also want her ability to crit with the Infinity Edge. So having like Spirit Shojin gets her to cast a lot. Deathblade is the most AD you could get from an item, and then IE is just really solid for critting people. However, if you don't have Spread Shot and you're playing her in Anima Squad, you could just throw a Rageblade on her because she'll be your secondary carry, whereas MF will be your primary carry, and then you could just keep her at one item for the whole game. If you're playing her in Duelist, just build any attack damage item. So I'm going to list them all out to you right now. It could be Edge of Night. I would skip Rageblade because she already gets a lot of attack speed from the Duelist buff. Gunblade is decent, IE is decent, Jeweled Gauntlet is okay, obviously worse than IE. Last Whisper, pretty decent, Giant Slayer, very good, Guardbreaker, pretty good, Quicksilver, pretty good. RFC is usable, but not ideal. Runon's very good, Shojin, semi-usable, and then Hand of Justice, pretty good as well. You could also even do like a Titan's Resolve, because Duelists actually stack that up pretty quickly. But whenever you play Duelist with a Vayne carry, you just want to slam items as early as possible, so you're not really looking for best in slot items. But let's move on into the most interesting ones, which is the 4-cost units. So this is also where we have the most new champions, as you guys can see already. So Aatrox starting off at the top here plays Zac as the health tank threat. His best build is just going to be Warmog's Redemption and then Titan's Resolve. It just gives so much effective HP for him, and he really does benefit a lot from like having a lot of health, as you can see from reading his ability. So the Warmog's definitely really good. I wouldn't say it's required, but it's extremely good. And then whenever you have a lot of health, Redemption is just going to make it work out really well. And then any item that gives both resistances, such as like Gargoyle Stone Plate or Titan's Resolve, is going to complement that build really well. However, since Aatrox does do a bunch of damage, I prefer the Titan's Resolve over the Gargoyle Stone Plate. Echo, on the other hand, is pretty much like a pure tank, and Echo has a built-in taunt. So instead of building like generic tank items such as Warmogs, Bramble Vest, and Dragonclaw, nothing wrong with those items. If you have them on your Echo, it's really good. But since we're talking about like the best items for a certain champion, I prefer having the Gargoyle Stone Plate on him because he taunts people to him, so you get a lot more value from the Stone Plate. So that's kind of why I like that over like a Bramble Vest, for example, if I had a choice on the carousel. Obviously in TFT, you don't always have that choice, so do keep that in mind. Then, since he's played in a lot of ability power compositions just because he's Star Guardian, having an Ionic Spark, Sunfire Cape, those are just the generic AP tank items that you kind of use in those builds. After that, we have Garen. He's going to be a Mecha Prime, as denoted by this like Mecha Prime symbol. And then when you have that, you just really need to get 3 items on him ASAP. It doesn't really matter when or how, you just need the 3 items on him. And it's okay to have suboptimal items on your mech because as long as you just have 3 items on him, it's going to be really good. That's like kind of how they're balanced around. If you have like a 1-item mech, it's like you're doing it wrong. The best item for mechs, it's going to be the Redemption because it heals based on % health. And other viable options can be the Dragonclaw. Just pretty much get one or the other. It depends how much ability power comps are in your game. So if you're facing a lot of AP, obviously the Dragonclaw is going to be better. If not, like Redemption's going to be a bit better. For the other items, since he's so tanky, having like utility items such as Sunfire Cape is really good because it kind of gets him to do a bit more damage than other tanks. And then like the third item, you could do like a Bramble. It really doesn't matter. It's a really close call on like Bramble versus Dragonclaw versus Protector's Vow versus Gargoyle Stone Plate. You could even do stuff like a Bloodthirster because again, it shields based on like a % of their max health. So there are a lot of viable options there. You could also do a Titan's Resolve because you always guarantee full stacks. Next up, we have Bel'Veth as the AD melee carry. So she's going to want Last Whisper if she's your primary carry. If she's not your primary carry, you do not need the Last Whisper, but I'm going to assume she's your primary carry. Again, this goes into the assumptions up here where like things change depending on your build. But honestly, Bel'Veth uses so many items so well. Titan's Resolve is extremely good on her because she attacks so quickly, so she gets the full stacks really quickly. Also, since she's kind of in the front, she does end up taking a bunch of damage, so she does make use of the resistances. You need the healing because she takes a lot of damage as well. Edge of Night is incredibly good on her. Like, I wish I could add an Edge of Night on her. Like, you want technically healing from an augment such as Back for Blood, which is her carry augment, Celestial Blessing, or Thrill of the Hunt, so that you could put the Edge of Night on her instead of the healing item. That would kind of be the ideal Bel'Veth build. Also, Runons is incredibly good on her too, just because she can sometimes get stuck on a tank. So if you don't have the Last Whisper, put the Runons on her so she could hit other people too. Next up, we have Warwick. Just stacking him is really nice. It's gonna depend though, because they might nerf Warwick and that's gonna change up his build a bit. He also benefits a lot from healing. He does get healing from the hacker trait if you hacker him in, but there are a couple of different ways to approach Warwick. You could do like full damage builds, you could do like big healing builds. It's really gonna depend on what your opponents are playing, what comp you are playing, and also what stage of the game it's in. But I think by far the best item on him is going to be a Titan's Resolve, just because he's just always going to get full stacks and he makes use of like all the stats extremely well. Whenever there's a champion that could get full stacks from Titans, you generally just always want to build it on them. Viego, same thing, like he loves Titans because he's in the front, but it's not like his best item. So his only best item is going to be some sort of healing. So Hextech Gunblade's going to be really good. Hand of Justice could be replaceable as well. Ionic Spark, really good because he jumps around and you really want him to not get stuck on tanks. So you could have the Ionic Spark on a different unit, but sometimes they die and then your Viego can't kill the tank anymore after that Ionic Spark holder dies. So I generally like having the Ionic Spark just on your Viego. For the third item slot, it's a kind of like a tie between Titan's Resolve and Rabadon's Death Cap. He likes AP a lot because he is one of those champions that doesn't get AP from his traits. I know he's a heart, but it doesn't really stack that quickly compared to like Spell Slingers, which just get it right away. Of course, and again, this goes for like almost every champion in TFT. There are tons of items you could replace my recommendations with. Like pretty much any generic damage items that work on every champion is going to be like Giant Slayer and Guard Breaker because they're always going to have some sort of use. Obviously, Giant Slayer is better later in the game, or if you're in like a reroll lobby where a lot of people are over the Giant Slayer threshold. In order to decide the very best items for your specific game, you're always going to have to do an individual analysis. Onto Neeko, she's like the new Star Guardian Spell Slinger, so she replaced Talia from last set. I made a funny short about this. You guys can go check that out. I'll try to leave a link or a card here. But you could treat Neeko pretty much the same exact way you treated Talia. It's literally same exact items. Blue buff for Shojin, Jeweled Gauntlet, and then like Gunblade or like some sort of damage amp such as Giant Slayer, Guard Breaker, really doesn't matter. But one item that's pretty interesting is a Morello. I have seen that do pretty well on her, so you could experiment with that as you wish. Misfortune, double Shojin has always been her best build. A lot of people haven't realized this, but just getting her to cast is like the most important thing for her because she just has such a big mana pool and she has like no starting mana. So double Shojin is just incredibly good. It's just really hard to get. That's why you don't see it that often. But other good items, it's going to be like Giant Slayer, Guard Breaker, ability power such as like Hat, Jeweled Gauntlet. Hextech Gunblade's pretty usable. Archangel's pretty good because it takes her so long to cast. You get like a stack of Archangels by the time she does. You could even do Chalice of Power. I've experimented with that a little bit. It's good if you have other people that could make use of the buff. Onto the next unit, we have Aurelion Sol. So he's got a weird build. So I normally don't fully itemize my Asol. I just drop a Spear of Shojin on him and that's it. But if you must put 2 items on him, blue buff Spear of Shojin is a really interesting combination on him because if you read his mana pool, he is 30 out of 90 mana. So if you add a blue buff to him, he essentially gains 50 mana, and then if you add the mana from the tier of Spear of Shojin, you gain a total of 65, which is more mana than you need to get his first cast off by 5, but who cares, right? The reason why you want him to cast at the start of the fight is because he deals burn damage, and the earlier you apply burn damage, the more value you get from it. So that's why having Spear of Shojin as like your first item on him just so he casts faster is really nice, but then adding the blue buff just to get his first cast right as the game starts is really, really helpful. Apart from that, he's a great Chalice holder and pretty much just usable as an item holder for other carries that you're transitioning into. Next up, we have Twisted Fate. His build is really weird. He's kind of like a Kaisa, so he likes Static Shiv the most because he attacks really often and he's an AP champion. And then Rageblade is just going to be the best complementary item to Static Shiv in most cases. The whole debate between RFC versus Guinsoo's Rageblade is always going to come down to whether the fight's going to last a long time or a short time. Essentially, RFC adds 55% attack speed, Rageblade gives 10% attack speed with 5% bonus attack speed per attack. So it's going to take you, I think I'm doing the math right, it's going to take you 9 auto attacks to catch up to the attack speed of the rapid fire cannon. So if your team likes really fast fights, the RFC is going to be better than the Rageblade, but if the fight's going to be long, obviously the Rageblade's going to be better. For third item, you could pretty much use anything. Like Giant Slayer is probably really good, Gunblade's decent, any of the generic AP or like generic damage items will work for the third slot. Samira is a little interesting. Last Whisper is really good because whenever you're playing her, your only source of damage is going to be AD damage, so you just need the Last Whisper. The reason why AD champions always need Last Whisper and AP champions don't need like a Static Shiv all the time is because whenever you play an AP comp, your tank's running an Ionic Spark. So when that happens, you just don't need the Magic Resist Shred on your AP carry. But AD champions, there's no like tank item that reduces armor, so you're stuck with Last Whisper. So you always have to build it whenever you play AD comps. So Bel'Veth, Jhin, Samira, yeah, you're always going to have to do it. But same build as before, just like IE Runon's going to be completely fine on Samira. The crit's really nice for her. Runon's is really good on attack damage champions that deal kind of like AoE damage because it kind of helps them finish everyone off. But literally like these other 2 items after Last Whisper can almost be anything. Jhin, typical AD build, Last Whisper, IE, Deathblade. You don't really need anything special there. He benefits a lot from AD, so I do prefer the Deathblade over something like a Giant Slayer, but Like, it's not gonna make or break your game. Let's move into the 5 costs now. There's actually only one new 5 cost, so this one's gonna be pretty quick. The thing about 5 costs is that the best items change depending whether they're 1-starred or 2-starred. So I'll try to like help with that, but it's a little weird. I also don't recommend planning out the game building your items around your 5 cost units, because some games you just don't even get the 5 costs that you want. Lastly, sometimes you don't even have time to put 3 items on them. So sometimes they can only get 2 items. And in that case, like, what are you supposed to do? So first up is Leona. Leona, she's pretty much just a tank. I used to think of her as a damage unit, but because her ability doesn't give her any tanky stats, but making her a tank essentially allows her to kill a lot more things. There are a lot of interesting builds with her. Like, you could put Bloodthirster on her to kind of like have her be a drain tank, but I find that just pure tank is just the best for her. Her build's gonna differ from like the usual like Warmogs, Bramble, Redemption, Dragonclaw builds, because Protector's Vow is really nice on her. Protector's Vow gives 45 starting mana, and it allows her to get her first cast off really early, and her casting is probably the most important part about her kit. So that's why you want Protector's Vow. Protector's Vow is a great 3rd tank item, but it's also especially good on units that need to cast really early in the fight. If you have Leona at 1-star, you probably shouldn't itemize her at all, but if you do have her at 2-star, probably something like this will do pretty well. Mordekaiser, he's another tricky situation too. He is a huge difference between 1-star and 2-star. The goal of Mordekaiser is to get him to cast once and 1-tap the enemy team. So at 2-star, you want something like Rabadon Sethcap, Giant Slayer, and then Hextech Gunblade to kind of heal up your whole team. And the reason behind that is because when he's 2-starred, he deals so much damage that having Hat and Giant Slayer just pretty much guarantees 1-taps everyone in the back line. However, if he's 1-star, I'd do something a little bit different. I'd actually do something like a Jeweled Gauntlet, Hand of Justice to get more crit, and then after that, maybe like a second Hand of Justice or like a Rabadon's anyways. The reason behind that is because when he's 1-starred, you need him to crit in order to kind of pop off, in order to 1-tap everything, because it's either like you crit or you don't crit. There's really no in between. So that's kind of how the build differs when he's like 1-star versus 2-star. Next up, let's go over Nunu. So Nunu is going to be a bit weird for the whole 1-star versus 2-star thing as well. So first things first, you just need some sort of burn effect on him. So either Sunfire Cape or Morello will do. Sunfire Cape is better if he's 1-star. Morello is better if he's 2-star. The reason why is because he does more damage when he is a 2-star unit, and Morello kind of scales better with that. But if he's just a 1-star, you just kind of need him. You just kind of want him to be a bit more tanky, so that's why the Sunfire is a little bit better. Second best item is going to be like a Ionic Spark, and then third item, it could literally be anything. It could be I prefer tank items though, so stuff like a Warmogs if he's 1-star, or Redemption if he's 2-starred, Dragonclaw, Protector's Vow. There's like a ton of things that work on Nunu, and that third item can pretty much almost be anything. Next up, we have Fiddlesticks. So Fiddlesticks, if he's just 1-starred, just put a Morello on him and call it a day. However, if he's 2-starred, the build changes up a little bit. You just want like as much AP on him as possible. Sometimes you don't even need the Morello, but the Morello's on him from before because you like had him 1-star earlier in the game. You put the Morello on him, then you magically get him 2-star. You can't always remove the item from him. So, but we're talking like completely technically speaking or something like that. Like if he is 2-starred, you want like Ionic Spark and then full AP on him. So either Ionic Spark double Hat or Ionic Spark double Archangels, both work. And Archangels versus Hat is just really gonna depend on how early or late he activates. So if he's in your front row, Hat's probably a little bit better because he's not gonna make use of the Archangels as well. But if you second row him, third row him, or even back row him, then obviously the Archangels is gonna do a lot better. Onto the bottom right, we have the AP carries, but they're not really AP carries. They're mainly just support units, so just put the Chalice of Powers on them. Syndra really likes the Spear of Shojin because you just want her to cast a lot. And then Janna, she's gonna make use of the support items really well again. You could use either Chalice of Power or Zeke's Herald. And then I'm gonna make one exception. I didn't include Ornn items on anyone, but I'm gonna include it on Janna because she is just by far the best user of this item because it's like built into her kit to have people surround her. So the win rate on like Janna plus Randuin Sanctum is just like incredibly, incredibly high. Next up, we have Ezreal. He's just gonna be one of your AD carries. So you're just gonna want the Last Whisper on him. I'm not gonna mark Last Whisper as required though, because as a legendary, they do so much damage that sometimes it doesn't matter that the enemy has a lot of armor, and sometimes you have the Last Whisper on your secondary carry anyways. After that, since he's very ability reliant, IE is really good. IE is really good on champions that use their abilities for damage. So I'm going to get into something interesting on that in Urgot in just a second. Let's finish Ezreal off first though. So for his third item, there are a lot of different choices. You could build like Deathblade, you could build like Giant Slayer. Pretty much any generic attack damage item will do. However, I prefer Guardbreaker the most because his ability kind of hits everyone. So when he's in the back, he's attacking the tank, and a lot of tanks in TFT right now, they have some sort of shielding effect. So you're gonna activate your Guardbreaker effect. After that, you're gonna get a bonus damage of 30% on your ultimate ability that hits pretty much everyone. So it should deal a lot of damage to all their backliners that a lot of other carries normally cannot hit. So if we look at Giant Slayer, it deals 25% more damage to tanks, but this one deals like 30% more damage to pretty much everything because of the way his ability works. So that's why I like Guardbreaker as his third item the most. Now on to Urgot. What an interesting champion. So I was looking at a lot of builds for Urgot, and a lot of people, if you look at the data, they're building Infinity Edge on Urgot a lot, and I cannot understand why, because if we read Infinity Edge, it makes your abilities critically strike. So really good on Ezreal, as we just discussed, right? But if we look at Urgot's ability, his active ability summons a tidal wave, and it deals a % of their max health as magic damage, and then it also like CCs them. So we have to think about this for a little bit. Whenever we look at Urgot's damage chart, what do we see more? Do we see more magic damage or do we see more attack damage? I'm not saying his ability does 0 damage, but it really doesn't deal that much. So justifying an Infinity Edge is almost like never worth it compared to almost any other damage item in the game. For example, I'd rather have like an extra Giant Slayer on him or like a Last Whisper instead of that Infinity Edge. Hell, even like a Guardbreaker or any of the other wacky items that Urgot can use are all preferable over the Infinity Edge, at least for me. And again, all this comes down to is how much damage his ability does. It deals max % health and stuff like that, but like if we compare that to Morello, like Morello deals 10% of the holder's health, and his ability at 1 star it does 5%, at 2 star it does 8%. It really doesn't deal that much damage. You mainly use it for the stun and the loot. Next, let's think about what Urgot does best. Urgot is really good at killing tanks. So even though he's just a generic good unit because he's a legendary, like he is incredibly good at high single target damage. So because of that, you want to build a Giant Slayer on him so that he kills a tank as quickly as possible. After that, Hand of Justice is good because his range is a little low. He's only 3 range, so you end up playing him in like the third row a lot of times. So having some sort of healing on him is pretty good. And he also makes great use of both ability power and attack damage. So getting that is pretty nice as well. Lastly, since he does a lot of attack damage, Last Whisper is going to be really great on him. It's not going to be as great as like it is on Ezreal because he does do a little bit of magic damage, but it's still going to be incredible because like 90% of his damage or something like that is going to be from his physical attacks. Now onto some of the wacky items that Urgot uses really well. He uses Static Shiv really well because his attack speed is 1.0. We can't really see it here, but if you go to a summary, it will show that. So he actually procs Static Shiv a ton. So Static Shiv ends up being one of his best items a lot of times. It just is a little bit weird because, of course, Static Shiv does work better in comps that deal magic damage. So it really depends if you're dealing magic damage with your team or attack damage with your team. Another weird item that works on him is RFC because it makes him a lot safer and the attack speed gets converted into attack damage anyways. Not the best thing, but not the worst thing either. It's definitely very usable though. The last weird item I'm going to talk about is Spear of Shojin. It gets him to cast really quickly, so if you want to get like a lot more loot, it's pretty good. And it also gives all the stats that he likes, such as attack damage, mana, and ability power. There are also some other weird stuff you could do. You could like do farm builds on Urgot with like a lot of AP and stuff like that. Some people did that last set. If you get it in the early game, it's something to kind of definitely look into. But that's gonna kind of summarize up the whole best items on each champion. I hope this helps you a lot. And again, there are always going to be assumptions based on these recommendations, so you always have to kind of tailor it to your game and kind of use your brain a little bit. Just know like which champions need healing. So for example, on Gangplank, Like, yeah, the Gunblade's really good, but if you have like Thrill of the Hunt or if you have Celestial Blessing already, maybe you don't need the Gunblade. You could go like third damage item instead. So always look at each champion and like think of what they need and what we discussed in this video, and then kind of just build around that, because sometimes you get those from other sources. Like if you have scope weapons, do you really need the RFC on Jax anymore? Probably not, right? You could just go full damage items and go for and maximize that instead. If you want to see this full list and reference it later on when you're playing your games, head on over to bunnymuffins.lol/items. So again, hopefully you guys enjoyed this. Let me know what item combinations you think are really good on certain champions, because again, a lot of different things work in this game, and hopefully I'll see you all in the next video. Hey guys, thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to share and subscribe, and of course smash that like button. Each like is an LP I gain before the next video.